Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. Today's very special guest is Megan Doney, the author of Unarmed, about her experience surviving a school shooting. Megan, it's so good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to chat.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to join you on your podcast.
Thank you. So I should explain to people who might be listening on Apple, I broke my elbow. And so this is my first recording in a cast. It is, everything is harder, but we can totally have our conversation. So, Megan, I'm going to hold up your book here, Unarmed, which was such a powerful, personal story. You are an English professor at New River Community College in Christiansburg, Virginia. And on April 12th, 2013, there was a shooting. Why don't you tell us the story?
Uh, it was a beautiful Friday in April, and I was in my last class of the day, just about to begin a video clip about Hurricane Katrina, which I've been thinking about a lot because this summer is the 20th anniversary of Katrina, which is
Astonishing.
yeah, which seems shocking, but um, And as you know, I pushed the DVD into the machine, and within a few minutes, we heard the first gunshot. And one of my students just said, "What was that?" And I walked across the room and opened the door, thinking that it was probably just a car backfiring or something like that.
Mhm, mhm.
And then there were two more. Um, and I knew somehow that that's what was happening,
Mm.
and told my students to get out, and they just went right through the emergency exit. That's near where our classroom was positioned.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so there's the day and then there's the aftermath. So
Yes. Let's do just a little more on the day. And I hate having to do this, but there are some folks or some conversations about the whole shelter in place versus having the students and you leave the premises. If you had it to
yeah.
do again, would you make the same decision to have students evacuate?
knowing knowing what I know now, yes. At the time, we had never had a drill. I don't, I'm not, there probably was some kind of a protocol in place, but I had never looked at it. I had never thought
Hmm.
about it before. And it generally said to try to shelter in place, ideally, because if you are running, you don't know whether there's a second perpetrator or whether you might be sending your students into another line of fire.
Yes.
But um, I found out later, about a year later, that surveillance video showed the shooter coming to my room just a few minutes after we had fled. So
Unbelievable.
uh, yeah, so I'm glad that I just grabbed that decision out of nowhere in that
Yes.
moment.
Yes. So you and I had the opportunity to have a conversation at the Gaithersburg Book Festival, which was really enlightening and powerful, and everybody who attended really found it so moving. Um, Talk about the immediate aftermath for you and for the students.
Um, I think the immediate aftermath was very logistical,
Hmm.
um, because the shooting happened close to the end of the academic year with just maybe 3 weeks left in the semester. So um, we they the school took an example from Virginia Tech really and allowed students to either take their grades as they were and just sort of be done with the semester. They could keep on going if they wanted to. So it really, spluttered to an end.
Mhm.
There were police there every day. There were, counseling staff there every day. But it was much more about like, how are we going to get through these days and end the school year? And it wasn't, I think, until, for me at least, it certainly wasn't until later that I think that the weight of what had actually happened spiritually, psychologically, creatively really started to settle, really started to settle in.
Yes.
So there, it even as I think about it now, it's interesting to see it from this perspective and to think about the ways that people respond to something like that in the moment that seems to be that's procedural as opposed to um, affective.
Emotional, psychologically, I mean, all that. So I am holding up what not enough people are aware of yet, which is
Thank
the
you.
numbers 988. Everyone is taught from the earliest years about 911, but there is a suicide and mental health crisis hotline, free anywhere in the country, 988. Do you feel like you and your students were given enough mental health care support or offered that?
I'm not genuinely, I'm not sure what I, I'm not sure what the students were told. And that's honestly, I'm genuinely not sure what if I'm remembering things
Hmm. Hmm.
accurately.
Hmm.
Um, most of my students, for example, stopped coming. They just didn't persist for the rest of the semester. And
Hmm.
so many of them I kind of just didn't even see after that, the
Hmm.
initial back. It
Hmm.
just, I just didn't see them really.
That's a real lack of
I,
closure for you and for them.
yeah, maybe so, maybe so.
Interesting.
Um, I will say that I think that because of where I live, which is out here, close to Virginia Tech, I have been very fortunate, in a tragic way, to have had really good mental health care, from a succession of counselors myself
Hmm.
who worked with people who had been at Virginia Tech, in different capacities, with
Hmm.
law enforcement and faculty and staff and community members. So I think by the time I showed up to their offices, they kind of, I wasn't the first person like this that they had seen. So,
Yes.
um, and I know that there are some folks who experience firearm violence who don't have a mental health care community that knows anything about that. And so
Hmm.
I'm actually incredibly grateful that I've had those kinds of people on like a care support team.
Yes. Yes. So tell us about when and why you decided to write this book. How hard was it? Did it feel therapeutic to write? What was the process?
I really, it really hit me that I needed to write something. I would say within a year or so after the shooting, and I think that I mentioned this during our panel at Gaithersburg, that after the shooting, I'm a professor. I have access to many library databases, and so I typed in a whole bunch of search terms about like professors and PTSD, professors and shooting, or some permutation of those different kinds of search terms. And it was really shocking to find so little data. And I genuinely couldn't believe that there wasn't scholarship on this, because again, my shooting was in 2013. It's not like nothing had happened before that.
Right.
I just I thought, who you mean to tell me that no one has been looking at the people from Virginia Tech or from Columbine or from all the other places? Like how
Hmm.
is that possible?
Hmm.
Um, and that absence was really frightening, actually,
Yeah.
because it made my future seem very uncertain.
Mm.
And so I think there, I don't know if there was a specific day, but there was a realization eventually that just kind of where I said, oh, I guess I got to do that
Yeah.
because I'm the one who has to write that book. And really, I kind of thought that it was going to be more sort of a, I don't know, how to kind of like
Hmm.
deal with something like this, or something that was going to be um, much more chronological and much more linear accounting of life.
Hmm.
And just, I mean, the book really turned into these series of kind of interlinked essays around the, themes of what it means to be safe.
Yeah.
Because, a school to me, should be a place it should be a place that's secure.
Hmm.
It ought to be a sanctuary.
Hmm.
Um, and when it isn't anymore, that is that is disastrous.
Yes.
Um,
So
so,
how long did it take you to write your first draft? And how hard was it for you?
oh wow. First draft.
Because I assume I mean, your
Yeah,
editor had thoughts and feedback.
well, um, I had, let's say I had a draft in 2017. So let's say that was let's say 3 years,
Hmm.
2014 to 2017.
Hmm.
And that's kind of in 2017, that was when I first started to give it to other people to look at, to say, I've got this big thing. I don't know if I don't know is it good? I don't know.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, so I submitted it to a manuscript consulting service that was run by an author whose work I just admire beyond,
Mm.
beyond description. And she, to hear her say, this is amazing. And she gave a ton of, feedback, like very constructive, critical feedback. It's, so
Yes.
I want to make it clear that like she was like, you should be publishing this now.
Right. Right.
Uh, but she gave a lot of constructive feedback. And then it was actually a semi-finalist in a memoir contest that year.
Hmm.
Um, and then I later on in probably in like 2019, 2020, signed with an agent.
Right.
And then, so from 2020 to about 2023, I had some like actual literary representation
Hmm.
from people who helped me to put together a formal proposal in addition to the draft, and then start sending it to editors. So.
So you have been touring and reading and speaking. How challenging is it to live in the space of the worst day of your life?
Sometimes it feels really challenging.
Yeah.
um, one thing that I was really thrilled about in the panel at Gaithersburg actually was that you asked me to read from a part of it that I don't usually read from.
Yes.
Because often people want to, I generally read from the chapter about the day of the shooting, and I
Mhm.
understand why you kind of need to start there. Like that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
But in some ways, that is really not the most important part. It's that's this. There's a writer whose work I really admire, Vivian Gornick, who has a terrific book about craft. If there are any listeners who are looking at nonfiction writing, but she has a wonderful book called The Situation and the Story. And so the situation, is the precipitating event that someone might write about, but that's not the story. The
Mhm.
story is how the meaning that we construct around this event. So the afternoon of April 12th, 2013, that's the situation. But
Mhm.
that's not the bigger picture. That's that helped me to understand more about firearm culture in this country and
Yes.
this disastrous intersection between, certain elements of masculinity and firearms, and
Mhm.
the prevalence of firearm suicide, and all of these other things. So for me, that that knowledge is so much more potent and more important than the day itself.
Yes. Um, so I don't know whether this would be a relief or supremely arrogant, actually, but there was a paragraph that I had wanted to read, and I wonder what you think of my reading a segment of your book.
Yes, cool.
Okay, so it is the one that I had flagged was on page 121. And again, this is from Unarmed, an American Educator's Memoir by Megan Doney. And as a policymaker, and I was a former lobbyist with Jim and Sarah Brady on the Brady Bill and the assault weapons ban, I also come to this from a policy perspective as well as public safety. So you wrote, the people who trumpet the right to own as many guns as they want, of whatever kind, and to store them however they wish, are often the same people who proclaim the value of personal responsibility over all else. If you're poor, work harder. If you didn't want that cop to beat you, you shouldn't have been demonstrating. If you didn't want to have sex, you shouldn't have gone to that party in a short dress. Yet across the states, there is no consistent pattern of holding people responsible for their own deadly failures as gun owners. And it goes on from there. I think that's so powerful and so spot on. Do you want to speak to that?
Thank you for, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, I think that section and writing that part, some of those stories are incredibly difficult to read and to write about.
Mm-hmm.
To see the for folks, for listeners who haven't read this, there's a chapter in which there are many sort of news stories of we'll call them unintentional shootings, many of them of children in the home.
Yes.
And I cannot comprehend how it is controversial to say your 3-year-old should not be able to get hold of your gun. I don't get it. I don't get how there's a but that could follow that sentence. Your toddler should not have access to your firearms.
Right.
I don't know how. And one of the other I think really challenging discoveries of writing this book was kind of clashing up against the limits of some of my own empathy and my ability to connect with other people. I think there's a real, I'm a liberal minded person. Like I value like attempting to understand where other people are coming from.
Yes.
I cannot get to that place.
I hear you.
I cannot get to the place that says it's totally fine. They know not to touch it. And it's like, we have reams of data that shows that is not true.
Yeah.
And are you willing to bet your child's life on that?
Yeah.
And many people are.
Right.
And
every day, 12 kids die from guns and 32 are injured. I mean, the data, and since Columbine in 1999, 390,000 students have been in schools with gun violence, and 428 shootings have happened in schools since Columbine. The data is just terrifying. Talk about, you write about gun shows, which I thought was a really powerful part of your book. And people hear about the gun show loophole, but I think most people don't have an image of exactly what that is and why it's so terrifying, so dangerous.
Thank you. Those were very enlightening, disturbing experiences. And I certainly would never have done that if I had not become kind of part of this world. But I went to my first gun show in 2014, kind of for the exact reason that you mentioned, because I was becoming, kind of entering some activist spheres, and I thought, well, I ought to go. Like I ought to know what I'm up
Yes.
against, for
Yes.
lack of a better term. Like I should see what that other side, looks like. Um, well, the other side is selling Nazi flags in addition to firearms,
And we're
in
not
addition
talking
to
about the historic, like
correct,
collector
correct,
keepsake,
yes,
current,
yes.
new.
There was that, but they were also selling what were clearly new
Mhm.
swastika flags.
Mhm.
Um, and that is alongside, all of this weaponry of these, hollow point bullets that, as I understand, are actually prohibited for use in warfare because they are so damaging. Like you can't. That's an international, you know, rule that you cannot use those in an actual war. But you
Hmm.
can buy them in a vacuum sealed plastic bag in Roanoke, and probably in other places. And so that it ties, I think it tied back to these questions of responsibility because you can purchase a firearm from a private seller without needing to go through a federal background check. If you buy from a federally licensed firearms dealer, then yes, you do have to have a background check, but you can also engage in a private sale that is legal, but you don't have to do this. And I could have purchased, by writing a check to this man, an AR-15 and
Hmm.
just walk out of there with this gun.
Crazy.
And again, does that's perfectly legal, but does that make and probably for some people that would make me a responsible gun owner. I
Hmm.
didn't break any laws in acquiring that gun,
Hmm.
but it seems lunatic to say that that makes me responsible. Like I shouldn't. There's no universe in which I should have that. And
Right.
so,
Right. Um, I have a bunch more questions, but I also want to. 25 states prohibit, only 25 states, half the country, half of our states prohibit and outlaw those who have been convicted of hate crimes from owning guns. I mean, some of our laws, if you had a magic wand, and I asked you this at the Gaithersburg Book Festival, if you had a magic wand and could pass any federal legislation, what would you think is the top priority?
um, for me, a safe storage would be up there. But another one would be, to require liability insurance
Mm,
on firearm owners.
interesting.
I think that if you choose to have this, then you should also be carrying some kind of insurance on it. And um, another thing that I know that this will probably never happen, but I think that if I think just me that if your negligence leads to your child killing themselves or someone else, that should be a permanent loss of your Second Amendment rights.
Yes. Yeah.
And people are going to, say, but the Constitution says this. The right to vote is also a right, but it is routinely taken away by many states for
Hmm.
crimes that have nothing to do with voting.
Hmm.
if you if you have committed firearm negligence to the point that a child is dead, you're done.
Yes.
That gone,
Forfeit.
gone. I don't.
Forfeit. You're right.
That's done forever.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that if we actually took that notion of responsibility seriously,
Hmm.
we would have some real constraints on
Yes.
this. But
Yes. Tell us briefly, if you would, about the handgun control, gun safety advocacy. You talk a little bit about your thoughts about Moms Demand Action and the National Rifle Association, the NRA. Who do you think is doing effective outreach that says it, calls it as it is, and is making a difference?
I honestly think that altogether, many of them are doing this. I think that um, different organizations have different sort of levels of comfort and how far they are sort of willing to, how far they're willing to go. And I mentioned this at Gaithersburg. I think that, for example, Moms Demand Action is and has been a really meaningful, grassroots experience for many, many people, clearly. It's just not for me because I said this, that I'm not going to go out there on behalf of an organization and say things like, I support the Second Amendment and responsible gun ownership, because I don't support the Second Amendment and I don't know what responsible gun ownership means. We have not established that yet.
Yep.
And there's I follow an activist whose daughter was killed at the Aurora movie theater, Sandy Phillips. And she and I we've talked on the phone just, I think, once. But she recently posted on social media, because June is Gun Violence Prevention Month, and so there's going to be a lot about wearing orange and things like that.
Yep.
And she just said, you know what, we don't do that. She just said, I'm not opting into that, because for me, every day is this. Every day is me missing my daughter and, trying to push back on, these avalanches of normalized firearm carrying and firearm violence that we have. And so I honestly find myself most sympathetic to to her perspectives, that all these other things, I understand why they're meaningful to other people. I really do. I don't want to denigrate any of that.
Sure.
But I think that you have to be able to be, I believe that, I've earned the opinions and the perspectives that I have.
True. So back to the book. Is there anything you wish you had included or excluded that didn't make it to the final version?
Okay, so there was an essay that was part of the book that wound up getting picked up somewhere else, and it's published in an anthology that came out a year or so ago, maybe no, actually longer than that, probably 2022, I think, and it is about an encounter that my husband and I had with a black mamba in Botswana in our tent.
We are totally getting to South Africa before we wrap.
Right. Okay. So we were at a kind of a bush camp in Botswana. Woke up early in the morning and to hear like some sounds in our tent, and we looked over and there was a black mamba having a meal, not of us, but of a little rodent critter, right in our tent. And once and so they get very aggressive once they've just eaten, and so they kind of rear up like this, and the mamba isn't black on the outside, it's the inside of its mouth that's black, and so that's what you see when it hisses at you.
Okay.
And
how big an animal is this?
This one was probably like a juvenile, so like, I don't know, 3 feet or so.
Okay.
But they can get pretty big. But this is one of the deadliest snakes in Africa. And we were, like half a mile from the tar road, and I was like, let's just go, let's just dump our stuff and be out of here. And my husband is South African, and I thought, oh, he'll know what to do. He'll have this all mapped out. But it eventually kind of just went behind like a wardrobe, and we managed to just sort of get our stuff, and go.
Right.
But I love that essay, and it was really hard to finally get it placed somewhere. But it's tied to this whole idea that, like, you have no idea how your day is going to go.
Right.
I went to work on a Friday. I went to school on a Friday, and I wound up writing a witness statement for the police.
Right. So
I woke up in Botswana, and there was a
snake
in the tent.
your journeys to Africa, to South Africa, to Botswana, were so uplifting and so needed, and then falling in love and remarrying, um, in a book that was so sad, and it was really nice. I thought it was a lovely balance, so that we didn't
Oh,
have to be completely worried about you, that you did find joy and love again. That was wonderful. Will you write again? Are you working on anything now?
I am working on something totally different that is fiction this time. And I'm thinking, I'm aiming actually for a novella. So like 100 pages is going to be about my limit. And so I'm thinking very differently about this.
That's
So,
fun. I will look forward to reading that. So I have one question that Gaithersburg Mayor Judd Ashman asked me to ask you, which I thought was
okay.
really great.
Maybe,
You are a fairly introverted person. What is it like for you to have to push yourself to be on stage, to be in the limelight? How is that for you, and has that changed you?
um, this is kind of tapping into the same things that I think make me a good teacher. That I am really, I am a really introverted person, but there are certain contexts where I'm fine sort of being out there, and kind of crafting this persona, because teaching is about developing a persona. You've been in the classroom too, I think, so
Mhm,
you kind
mhm.
of know what that's like. Um, and so I'm a little bit of a, like I can be really intense, I think, in the classroom, but also a little bit of a goofball. Like I can first interpretive dance and like create Frankenstein puppets and things like that. But um, so I just know that I always am going to need a lot of like
Downtime.
retreating, sort of
Yes. Yeah.
recharge
Yeah.
time.
Nope, I get that. All right. Well, Megan Doney, it is time for the Fast Five. Five quick
Okay, yeah,
questions, five
okay,
quick answers, and
all right.
I came up with fun ones for you because I didn't want to stay in a place of sorrow the whole time and stuff. So, question number one, tell us something that makes you laugh.
Uh, Animal videos online.
Okay. Question number two, what is a favorite family tradition?
Oh gosh. That one is harder. Thinking about like both like family of origin and my husband and I as a family. Honestly, the first thing that came to mind is just like being able to go back to South Africa and see and be there together and to see my husband's family. Like that, those are just incredibly important moments for me.
Nice. What is your favorite junk food?
Triscuits and cheddar.
Ah, okay. Question number four. If you could meet and get to chat or get advice from any author, living or dead, whom would you choose?
Oh, one of them might be the Afrikaans writer Ankie Krok, who I write about in the book. She reported on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and writes about sort of being a white Afrikaner and her what is implicated to her, and what her responsibilities are. So yeah, she would be an amazing person to talk to.
Fantastic. And the
Yeah.
question number five, the question I ask all of my guests, author Megan Doney, what is your hidden secret superpower? What's a skill or talent you have, something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Um, I should have seen that question coming. That seems like something. That seems like a question that you might ask. I'm good at making up like weird little songs about all kinds of things.
Okay.
like
Well, that's fun.
really about all kinds of anything.
Okay.
Little dream.
Have you
Yeah.
ever performed on stage?
No,
Okay.
no,
Okay. All right. Well, maybe that
no.
could be in your future. Could be a fun thing. But Megan, thank you for taking time to kibitz today. But even more, thank you for your book. I'm holding it up again, Unarmed, by Megan Doney. I hope you will buy it, read it, and spread the word because it's a really personal, powerful, important story that has not been sufficiently told. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for putting yourself out there, which and living in the trauma and educating the rest of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time for inviting me on here. It's really a joy. And yeah, you ask amazing questions. You are a terrific interviewer.
You're
Very
very
good.
kind. You're very kind. Well, I hope our paths cross again, Megan. Stay well. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.